Shall we take a look at today's readings before we begin Mass? So our first reading today is from the book of the prophet Isaiah, or more specifically from the book of Trito-Isaiah. We remember that the book of the prophet Isaiah was written by 3 different authors in 3 different time periods: before the exile, during the exile, and after the exile. Today's first reading comes from that time period after the exile, where the people are returning from exile to the destroyed city of Jerusalem. So this reading by Trito-Isaiah then is meant to inspire these people who are coming back to their hometown, back to their home country, and finding it devastating. What does Isaiah say in today's first reading? He says, "Rise up in splendor, Jerusalem, your light has come." Even though the city is destroyed and looks absolutely terrible when you're coming back to it and you have to rebuild it, but we can rejoice because the light is dawning in Jerusalem. It's a new day in this destroyed city of Jerusalem. The first line, "Rise up in splendor," is significant because earlier in his book, Isaiah talks about how it is that Israel, the people, Israel is like a woman lying on the ground who's just lost her child. Imagine that image. Israel is like this woman lying on the ground, inconsolable, grieving the loss of her child. What is the first line of today's first reading? Rise up in splendor, Jerusalem. It's like Israel, that God is coming down and pulling up Israel. Israel was down and out like that woman who had just lost her child. Now God is coming and lifting her up, lifting up Jerusalem. Isaiah says, "Your light has come. The glory of the Lord shines upon you." It's this vision of glory. How it is that there's going to be this restored Jerusalem, a new city, a new people. The light is dawning in darkness. The reading continues in line 3. "See, darkness covers the earth, and thick clouds cover the peoples." But wait, what's going to happen? Line 4, "Upon you the Lord shines, and over you appears God's glory." So God's presence, God's glory is likened to this light that is shining over the city now of Jerusalem. What will happen? Line 5 continues, "Nations shall walk by your light." And that's where it becomes significant for us, because now the prophet Isaiah is foretelling how it is that not just the Israelites, not just the Jews of Jerusalem, but all nations are going to be streaming toward Jerusalem. All nations will be brought together. A vision that we'll see later in today's second reading. A vision that really brings to life the promise that was made to Abraham, that Abraham would be the father of all nations. Here we have all of the nations being gathered together in Jerusalem. The first reading today ends with those lines of how it is that caravans of camels shall fill you, dromedaries from Midian and Ephah, all from Sheba shall come bearing what? Gold and frankincense. Where have we heard those before? Gold and frankincense? Ooh. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 6. Is Matthew chapter 2, what we hear in today's gospel. In today's gospel, the Magi arriving on the scene with gold and frankincense, Matthew is saying that was foretold by the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah said that people would come on camels bearing gifts of gold and frankincense. What does Matthew say happened? Matthew says that what happened was people came arriving on camels and dromedaries, bringing gifts of gold and frankincense. The vision that Isaiah had is now becoming real. In today's second reading, we have a letter to the Ephesians. Remember that Ephesians and Colossians, from which we heard last week, are twin books. Neither was written by Paul, but for years we attributed them to Paul. We believed that they were written by Paul. So today's second reading was written in Paul's name and in Paul's spirit, but it wasn't written by Paul. In today's second reading, we hear about that mystery that God kept secret for so long. What was the mystery, the secret? that God one day was going to bring all people together in God's self. All people. Salvation is not just for the Jews. Salvation is for everyone. We can't shut other people out, that God is going to come and save them as well. They are part of us. What does it say in the 6th line of today's second reading? It says that the Gentiles are co-heirs and members of the same body. They're co-partners in the promise of Christ Jesus. Meaning, there is no more Jew or Gentile. As Paul said in his letter to the Galatians, there is no more male or female, slave or free, Jew or Gentile, us versus them. No. It's all of us together, which includes the ones that we previously saw as them. The Gentiles now share in that promise. Even if you're not a Jew, you share in God's promise of salvation to the Jews. We're all brought together. Why is that significant on this feast of the Solemnity of the Epiphany? Because were the Magi Jews? No, they were Gentiles. Matthew is trying to say, if the Magi, these non-Jews, these Gentiles, recognize Jesus, why can't you? And so we see how it is in the second reading today that the Gentiles, the non-Jews, also share in the promise of Christ. Today's gospel, then, is that famous reading from the 2nd chapter of Matthew that we celebrate in the Epiphany event, the arrival of the Magi in Bethlehem. We see in the 3rd line how it is that the Magi followed the star. Why is that significant? The star at its rising? Because in the book of Numbers in the Old Testament, remember that the first 5 books of the Bible are called the Pentateuch. Those books include a book called Numbers, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In this book of Numbers, we have this prophecy by Balaam, who had this oracle, in which Balaam saw how it was that a star would rise from Jacob and a ruler would rise from Israel. Think about that prophecy for a moment. So Balaam, a non-Jewish prophet, had this oracle, had this vision of how it was that a star would rise for Judah. Jerusalem was located in Judah. How it was that a leader, a ruler, would come forth from Israel. Who was that ruler? Christians believe that that ruler was Jesus. So in today's gospel, then, when the star rises for the Magi, one automatically thinks of that image from the book of Numbers, of a star rising from Jacob, a ruler rising from Israel. We have the story there of how it was that the Magi came following the star, came to Jerusalem. Herod spoke with them, saying that he wanted to give homage to the king. This is all significant because did Herod really want to give homage to the king? No. He wanted to kill Jesus. Herod was the king. And if people are believing that another king has come, what do we have to do with that other king? That other king has to go. So Herod's intentions of killing the child Jesus foreshadow the intentions of killing Jesus later in his life. How it was that Jesus will later be rejected and persecuted, all that is foreshadowed here in this story about Herod. So the Magi continue, they follow the star, they find the Christ child, they offer him gifts and treasures, and then they return home being warned not to go back to Herod because of Herod's intentions for the child. So those are the readings we celebrate on Epiphany. Really readings about how it is that we're called to include all peoples. God didn't come just for the Jews, as the second reading says. God came also for the Gentiles, the non-Jews, people like us. How it is in the first reading that this light is shining in Jerusalem and all peoples will be gathered together, Jews and non-Jews like the Magi alike. And isn't that what we as a church are supposed to be about? About welcoming others, of drawing all people together, regardless of who they are, where they come from, what religion they are, etc. All of us are one.